All right, in this demo, I'm going to show you how you can use Photoshop to make like a logo or a mark. And we're going to cover some things like select and mask tools and applying some adjustment layers to do something really quickly, text on path, etc. All right, so first thing is that there's this PS demo start file, and it's got two files in it. It's got this picture of a black dog, and it's got some grass. So what I'm going to ask you to do is open the black dog .jpg in Photoshop. And you can either right click and say open with, and then you can find Photoshop like that and find the correct version, the most recent one that's available on the computer, or you can also just go into Photoshop and open using the file open option. All right, and so this is the file that we've got to start with, and it's I went ahead and to make things simple, I made it a little bit bigger so that we didn't have to increase the canvas size and stuff just for this demo. But what we can do is you can zoom in using this on the left hand side. There's this toolbar, right? You can go into the zoom tool and you can zoom in that way. I'm on a trackpad, so I can also zoom in using my gestures as well. All right, and I'm going to also make it like that. So if you're not looking at what I'm looking at, to make things simple, if you go up here to Window, you can go to Workspace, and you can say Reset Essentials, and it's going to reset it back to the default um, Photoshop Essentials panel screen. So first of all, I'm not going to be covering how to use libraries for Creative Cloud. So I'm going to double click libraries and collapse it. And then that way I get to things that I really care most about, which are layers, channels, and paths. All right, so let's go ahead and show your layers. We have this dog in the background layer, which is locked because it is the only layer. That's how stuff will originally start out. But what I want to do is I want to kind of select this dog, and you can see that the selection could be kind of, no pun intended, a little hairy, right, around the edges. And we're going to use select and mask to make that happen really quickly. But first, to get started, I'm going to start by using this quick selection tool over here on the right. It's about 1, 2, 3, 4 down. And if for some reason, it should be showing if you reset the essentials like I told you, but you can also click and hold if for some reason you didn't reset it and like the magic wand is selected, you can choose the quick selection tool. And you can adjust the brush size. Sometimes having a really big brush is helpful. Sometimes having a smaller brush is helpful. It really just depends. And I have my hardness turned all the way up. All right, so there's some different features about this that you can change. And then also you'll see this, there's like the regular pen, there's a plus, and then there's a minus. I'm going to leave plus turned on. That way it'll automatically add to my selection every time I click or make a new selection. It won't deselect my previous selection if I leave it on this little plus symbol. All right, so if I start maybe in the dog's head, I can kind of click and you can see that it'll grab pixels that are similar in color, right? And that's kind of what's happening right now. And I'm not actually drawing, and don't worry about the grass down here. We can get rid of that later. So I want to kind of help you understand not to be too fussy about your selection. And you'll notice that automatically it just grabbed all this grass. If I wanted to undo that, I can do Command Z on a Mac or Control Z on Windows. And so I just did Command Z. And if I start to make some of these selections, you'll see that it adds to my selection. And something about getting inside of here, it automatically starts to select the grass. I can do Command Z again. You could play with different brush sizes, and you're going to find that by and large, you're going to have this problem on this particular picture. And so don't worry, because there's some other things that we can do as well. So what I'm going to show you how to do is this thing called select and mask. So while we've got this rudimentary selection made, we're going to go up to where it says select, and then we're going to choose select and mask. And it changes the screen on us. And actually what you're probably going to see, that's the last thing I had done, is you're going to see something that looks more like this, and probably the opacity will be somewhere in the middle. So this is probably more like what you're going to see right now. And so what I want to show you really quickly is the fact that you can change your view mode, where sometimes it's really nice to see it with the red overlay, because red is not something typically that's going to be in a lot of photographs in this kind of quantity, and so that's why they use that as the overlay color. but there's also this black and white, which is really nice because it shows you the harsh edge and it doesn't give you any of the additional material. It's basically the pure mask information. But we're going to start with red and I'm going to turn up the opacity so that you can kind of see more contrast around the edge. All right, and so this is one of the things that you can do. All right, and you can also change the color if you don't like red. Like if you actually have red in your picture, you can change it here to something else by clicking this little color button. You can also change the masked areas versus selected areas. This is traditional though, so you might want to just leave it that way. Now, if I kind of scroll down here, you'll see there's some different things that I have the capability of messing with. I'm not going to mess with those just yet. Right now, I'm going to focus on getting rid of the grass and refining the edge of the dog. So the first thing is that you'll notice there's this brush up here. This is a form of quick select within the mask area, within the select and mask. And I'm going to make sure right now that I've got my minus symbol because I'm going to be subtracting. And if I kind of draw in this grass area, you see how it does this interesting kind of fill in this area. And it's trying to sort of avoid the dog's tail as much as possible. I kind of cut a little bit too much in there. I'm going to undo that with well, actually, let's just go back and do plus, and I'll get rid of some of the stuff that was in that tail. There we go. I'll go back to the minus symbol now, and I'm going to continue getting rid of some of this grass down here. All right, and it's working better inside of the select and mask than it did in my normal selection tools. All right, and so this is kind of a nice tool, and then it's, as I said, behaving similarly to the select and mask, okay, that we were using before. All right, now the other thing that I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and show you how you can soften this edge up in here, right? So the second tool that's down here, the second brush tool, you see how it sort of has like almost like a feathery, it looks like a little weird hand, but it's like a feathery kind of effect. So you can use this to go around the edges of things and it'll help delineate. It's got this really great algorithm. It helps delineate these edges in a way that would take you hours and hours and hours otherwise. And it's what people used to have to do before this tool existed in Photoshop. So anyway, if I come over here, I can let's blow this up so you can see this a little bit better. See how there's a little bit of green, for instance, right here? Well, if I draw that right along the edge, you see that what it's doing is it almost looks like it's masking out those edges, but what you can do is draw a little bit on the outside of it, and you see it's actually giving me more definition of some of the hair that's sticking up around the dog, right? Like some of that, okay? And then make sure, by the way, that your plus symbol is turned on for this tool, right? As you're going around these edges. And then if you get too much, you can just change it to the minus symbol and then go back and then you're okay. All right, and so, and it's getting rid of some of that other information of the green grass in the background that I didn't want, right? And so this is kind of a nice thing to use whenever you've got something with like hair or like tree branches or that kind of thing. All right, something that's really, really hard to pick through, but it's especially good for hair. All right, so I'm going to kind of just come around and do all these edges. And actually, I think that I'm going to go backwards. I don't think that I want that. And instead of me using the same tool with the minus symbol, I actually think I want to use this third tool down, which is the hard edge tool. Like, oops, okay, not like that. I'm going to undo that. So Command Z, well, actually, it's not undoing. I can just go back and use the minus symbol. There we go. And I'm going to just kind of draw that. I don't want all those fluffy edges around there, right? I think the way that the feet are, I'm just going to kind of do this because what I'm ultimately going to have later is I'm ultimately going to have something that is going to be a silhouette that's standing in grass, right? So now if I want to continue getting some of these other edges, I can go back to this tool, the second one down, and I can start to use this around these edges. So I'm going to kind of try to speed this up a little bit so you can see how fast that you can do this. It's actually really useful to do this quickly. And let's get up in here around the underside of his tail like this, okay? So we've got some of these details, and then we can decide in a second what we want and don't want. All right, so now we've got this basic selection, and it's kind of still hard to see with the red. So if I go up here, I'm going to scroll back up here, and I'm going to choose black on white. And I want to get rid of these edges around the edge of the square edges, right? So I'm going to take this tool, and I'm going to go ahead and using the minus subtraction, right? I'm going to subtract from the mask, and then I'm not worried too much about the way that the bottom of those feet look right now, and you'll see why later. I'm going to ultimately have this dog standing in some grass, all right? And so I do care about how the tail looks, though. I want to kind of get some of this area. I don't want it to look too scruffy, you know, so let's see. And then I also don't want this edge to look too, oops, that's a little bit too harsh. Let me go back and, actually, I'm going to just kind of do this on the tail, and then what I can do is take this tool and kind of come back in here and give it a little bit more definition, but now it's not such a straight edge. So anyway, you can kind of play around with this. Now, this isn't where I'm going to leave it. Oh, and I'm also going to get rid of like that, for instance. I don't need that. I want a sort of soft, rounder foot. Now, I'm not going to leave it like this. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play with some of these things down here. So for global refinement, first of all, I can shift the edge if I want. I can shift it down, and so I can pull that in, or I can add it, right? So you can play with the edge shift, which is really helpful for some things. Maybe not as much for this dog, but it's incredibly helpful for some other kinds of selections. I'm also going to turn up the contrast because I want something that's very, very graphic. So I'm going to have these harder edges because I don't want soft edges on something that's going to be a logo, right? I want something that's nice and crisp and graphic. So I'm going to turn up the contrast. I'm not going to smooth it, but you can see like kind of what you could do with smooth. It's really helpful for some kinds of things, but just not for this. And I can also play around with the smart radius, and I'm going to increase the radius just a little bit. And then if you increase it a lot, you're going to see that it includes way too much information, like if I put it way up there. So you can explore with this and kind of play around with it. But you can use this to kind of also refine your edges. And now I've got this really fast selection that I made. If I scroll down to the bottom where it says output settings, I'm going to output to a selection, but you have other options. You can output to a layer mask. You can, actually, let's go ahead and do that. We can output to a layer mask, and that'll create the duplicate. We could also output just to a selection. Actually, let's just do that. Let's output to just a selection. I want to show you the difference between these two things. If I go to selection and I say OK, then what I've got now is I can go up here to select, and I can go to save selection if I'm doing it that way. And if I save the selection, I'll call it dog. Let's just call it dog. And what that did was it saved it in the channels. If I look at my channels, you can see that it saved my selection so that for some reason, if I click off of this or something happens and I lose my selection, I can always go back up here to select. Oops, let's do that again. Select, load selection, and then I can choose the dog channel, load it, and it'll load it exactly in the same place, the way that it was. Now, if I wanted, for instance, to show you how it could actually create a layer with a layer mask, I can also go ahead and I'll go up to select and mask again. And then down here, I can say output to layer mask, and then you'll see what happens. What it did was it automatically masked the dog for me, and it applied that directly to the mask, directly to this layer. And now, just in case you're wondering, you might go, okay, well, how could I ever get that? Well, if I didn't have this where it says select and load selection, if I didn't have dog, I could also load the layer 0 layer mask. All right, that is something else that you can do, and you have to have it selected at the time. So anyway, let's just rename this layer. I'll double click here and I'll say dog. All right, and the next thing I can do is I'm going to add down here at the bottom. Let's see if I can show you a little bit better. Like down here at the bottom, this little half circle, that's the adjustment layers. I'm going to scroll down and find the thing that says threshold right there. And what threshold will do is it converts things to pure black and pure white. All right, so I'm going to turn this all the way up so that I get pure black. All right, that's what I'm interested in for this dog. And what it does is it does a non-destructive change so that if I decided I didn't like it, I can turn the eyeball off, turn it back on, eyeball on, right? So that now gives me a nice silhouette that I could use as a graphic. All right, so now that's how you can use select and mask for something that's really complex, like to refine edges. And you didn't have to turn the contrast up. You could have left it natural if you wanted to blend something naturally into another environment. But for our purposes, what we're trying to do is this. All right, so I'm going to zoom out by holding down the Option or Alt key on Windows, Option on Mac. I'm going to zoom out. And the next thing that I'd like to do is put some text going around this. And so there's some different ways to do that, but in Photoshop, you can use a vector path, and that's the next thing that we're going to do.